I want to talk to you today about wrestling with relationships. Wrestling with relationships. You know, often I think of, and maybe you do as well, relationships that I used to have, but I no longer have contact with. You know, there's people who come and go. You know, there's people I went to high school with. I graduated high school in 1992. Wow. She says, wow, you're ancient. And probably I only keep in touch with maybe 2 or 3 people from high school. You know, and at the time, it seemed like that was life. You know, I had no idea that I would ever live in the Philippines. Never. I mean, I knew a Filipino friend, like maybe one in high school. That was about it. But it just wasn't on my radar. It wasn't on the plans. So, you know, in life, we have these moments where maybe you went to a different church, or maybe you work somewhere. I've worked several jobs, or different people that I work with, you know. And at the time, you know, maybe we'd hang out a lot. We knew each other well, but then people move, transition take. Maybe when you were single and then you get married, you know, you don't hang out with your single friends as much as you used to. And life radically changes, and it does. And we do our best to keep relationships. And then there's people who, you know, stick much closer to us, not only just our family, but, you know, people who we do life with on a regular basis. And then there's people that we lose because of issues, because of offenses, because of, you know, division that the enemy comes in, and bitterness and things like that. And it happens to everybody. And, you know, as someone who values making disciples, wanting to see people mature in the Lord, you know, being a father, even maybe a spiritual father to people, I feel that pressure of when somebody came to the Lord and they were doing really good, and then you just never see them again. I mean, I've seen that probably more often than I want to see. And then there's people who stick a little bit closer to you, and then you pour out and you have great memories and things, and then it breaks down. So we all wrestle with relationships. In Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40, Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all of the law and the prophets." So in other words, if you can love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, you're going to be able to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And by doing those 2 things, you can actually obey all of the law. So when we say all of the law, we're not just talking about the 10 commandments, although that is included with it. We're also talking about the 40-something laws in the Old Testament that were requirements to follow God. You know, God had a method of responsibility of how man was supposed to approach him. And you could not compromise that. Why? Because God's perfect. God's holy. And then you have an imperfect human beings that are trying to know him and build relationship with him, but God cannot live in the presence of sin without judging it, because he's righteous, because he's a God of love, right? Because he's a God of love, he judges sin. And so understanding all of that helps us to realize that God's standard is so high that without Jesus, we would not have been able to love him truly. Because we all keep breaking the commandments. We all keep breaking the law, right? We all have strayed. We have all been prodigal sons and daughters at times. And the fact is, without Jesus, we could not have an ongoing relationship with God. You know, how many of you know that loving God and loving your neighbor is sometimes like trying to wrestle someone like Hulk Hogan or a sumo wrestler, right? Have you ever seen a sumo wrestler? So I've been in Japan when I was there several times over the years, but this one particular time we were in Tokyo and we were going by this arena where they do sumo wrestling. And so there were all these sumo wrestlers. These guys were much bigger than I was. Not only taller, but wider. I mean, if I was standing behind them, you could not see me. They were huge. And yeah, there was a little bit of extra tender loving care on this area. But these guys were solid. I mean, if I put my arm around one of them, and it was like putting your arm around something like this. These guys were no joke. I mean, if they come at you and hit you, you're not going to be around much longer. You're going to go see Jesus is what's going to happen. So, you know, it's like that. And actually, with the relationships we have, we feel like we're wrestling with people that, you know, we're never going to win, or we don't have much hope to win, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's difficult. I don't know how much you've actually wrestled, but I think there's 3 ways we wrestle in this life. Number 1, we wrestle with man. We wrestle with each other. And how many of you have ever wrestled before? Anybody? Informal. Okay, like siblings, right? Oh, my brothers and I. So we used to do this thing called fight in the dark. Okay, we had a house, and downstairs we had a basement, okay? Kind of like our house, the downstairs area, if you've been there. And we would black out the windows, and we would completely open the center, and anything sharp, we would like stand up a mattress or something on it, okay? And then we would shut the lights out and just beat the junk out of each other. It's guys, okay, I'm sorry ladies, I apologize. Our brains don't technically work until we're about 21, okay? And while we were there fighting each other, just looking to grab, and then you find someone, you know, you just fight and wrestle each other. There's no point to it. And then you're done. And usually you're done because somebody got hurt, you know, or someone, oh, I hit the wall. All right, let's stop, you know, I'm bleeding, you know. Okay, hey, I'm sorry. And then like 3 hours later, we're doing it again. You feel better? Let's do it again. That makes sense, you know. You know, when I was in 6th grade, I joined a wrestling team. I wasn't really interested in basketball yet. And I joined this wrestling team. And I said, okay, Eric. And at the time, I was taller than most of the guys in my grade. So they put you in someone in the same weight class. And this guy, I don't know how to wrestle. And I know you're supposed to pin somebody, but that's about it. And I basically grab the guy, throw him on the ground, jump on him, and he's you know, and I win. And I'm like, that was easy. Maybe I could really do this. Like maybe I'm supposed to be a wrestler, I get this calling, And then they said, okay, you're going to wrestle the second guy, and he has 2 years experience. And I'm thinking, he's a little skinnier than the other guy. I'm thinking, all I got to do is grab him by the neck, throw him down, and you can't hit each other. You're not supposed to do that. But I thought, this is going to be nothing, right? This guy had me wrapped in a pretzel. Like my body was all contorted, and he pinned me, and I'm thinking, what just happened? What did he do? Like, he knew all these things. He had these things, they wear. He had the wrestling outfit on. I had shorts and a t-shirt, and, I didn't really know what was going on. But that was, my wrestling experience. We would do all these dumb things wrestling with each other, but everybody has wrestled before. If not somebody physically, definitely relationally. Number 2, we wrestle in prayer. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." Now, Paul is not saying when you wrestle demonic forces that you're doing it on your own. That's why we say wrestling in prayer. Because when you go to wrestle these demonic forces, if you don't do it in prayer, you will lose. They're very strong. They're very powerful. They've been around for a long time, a lot longer than you've been alive. And so you and I have to understand that when we wrestle in prayer over issues, cares, concerns, or when we want to make declarations over our city or our family and break curses and, believe God to bring blessing, those things that we do in prayer, wrestling in prayer, that's when God gets involved. That's when God fights your battles for you. So you need to learn how to wrestle in prayer. Not only how to pray in intimacy, spending time with God, but you've got to learn how to fight. You've got to learn that you have authority in Christ. And if you don't take that authority, then it's kind of like someone who's been left $1 million in the bank but doesn't know how to access it, right? So Jesus has purchased for you a great inheritance, power, authority. But if you don't learn how to grow in that grace and what God's given you, you're going to walk around defeated. You're going to feel like that you don't really know what to do. And you could actually have an intimate relationship with God, but still not know how to wrestle works of darkness. And then number 3, there is wrestling with God, which is what we're going to talk about today, what Jacob did with God in Genesis 32. So by far, when we wrestle with God, it always has to do with our surrendering to God's purposes and overcoming in this life by God's grace. So when we wrestle with God, we're wrestling with our flesh before God's holiness. We're wrestling in faith so we don't live in doubt. Right? We're wrestling in these things with God, and God doesn't want to just beat us up and defeat us. He wants us to wrestle with him, to realize that we can never be stronger than him, so that in our weakness and our surrender, we will see God give us victory, because he actually laid his life down for us. So before Jacob wrestled with God, he did not know how to wrestle in prayer so much, which made him afraid of wrestling his brother, Esau. Now let me give you a little background on the story of Jacob and Esau. So they were twin brothers, right? Esau was the eldest. Jacob came right after him. And they are the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. And they're known for their sibling rivalry, and there's rooted in conflict, deception, favoritism. Jacob the younger stole Esau's birthright. You remember that story where Esau was a man, he was a hunter, and he would go out and get some game, bring it back, and I think he wasn't able to get anything. And then Jacob was making some nice stew, and Esau said to his brother, give me something to eat. And he said, sell me your birthright. Now, your birthright at that time was always given to the eldest of all siblings, and there was a special blessing that is passed down on the eldest, this birthright. So you could think of Jesus being the firstborn, right? And there was a birthright on his life as well. And because of that, we received the blessings of a firstborn son, right? We're grafted into that. But he stole his birthright and tricked his father, who was blind, into giving that blessing to Jacob. And when Esau came in, after Jacob prepared food and gave it to after Jacob gave his food that he prepared to Isaac, Isaac gives the blessing because he's deceived by Jacob. And then Esau comes in with his and food that he prepared for Isaac. And Isaac had already given Jacob the blessing. And so that made Esau extremely angry. And he made some threats against his brother Jacob. So they fought in the womb. There was actually wrestling in the womb, which foreshadows their future conflict. Jacob took the birthright from Esau. And then also, encouraged by Rebekah, Jacob disguised himself as Esau and took the blessing intended for the firstborn. And then, fearing for his life, Jacob flees from Esau. And after years apart, we'll read about in a moment a reconciliation that took place. But as you look through like Genesis 25 all the way to about Genesis 32, before their time of reconciliation, there were some different points that I noticed. And this is the first point, and then I'm going to go through these 6 points, and then after that, we're going to read Genesis 32, 22 through 32. But in this life, each of us will have an Esau that we have to wrestle with. Everybody in this room, I'm not saying you will all have a brother or a sibling to wrestle with, but what I'm saying, there are people in your life that you're going to have to wrestle with, or a Jacob, right? And you're going to have to deal with these relationships in a way that should be honoring, that you work through situations and you don't just cut each other off or demand something from each other. I mean, when Jesus laid down this law of love your neighbor as you love yourself, that is not an easy thing to do with everybody. Because not everybody treats you the way that you want to be treated. But yet Jesus gives us an example that the way that you want to be treated is how you treat others. And so by laying his life down for the world, he set the standard so high that even when people mistreat you, you still forgive them and love them. And I don't know about you, but that's not always easy for me. And this is part of the reason why I'm saying we struggle, we wrestle with relationships. Because these Esau's in your life, I've had people in my life who who would talk down at me, whether people in church or people at work, and they would talk to me not in a respectful way, but demanding me to do things. And it never came from a posture of, I care about you, or I recommend you. No, it was harsh. How many of you dealt with harsh people before? Yeah, and sometimes it could even be downright abusive. But here's the deal. We have to, like Jesus, look at these relationships that we wrestle with, and we have to be willing to say, I forgive you. And that situation, no matter if it's been one or many different experiences, should not define our identity and purpose in this life. We have to make sure that when we wrestle with different Esau's or Jacob's, right? People who deceived us. Have you been deceived by people? Someone you thought was your friend, someone you thought you could trust, and then they break that trust. This is a very challenging thing for us to deal with, is wrestling with these relationships that we put so much hope in, right? And yet it doesn't turn out the way that we expect it. Number 2, some things we cannot learn until we endure the pressure of offenses with others. You will not learn it. You can learn a lot of things in theory. A lot of people in the church know things in theory, but not by experience. You know why? Because we want to protect ourselves at all cost, which I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't protect yourself. Absolutely, protect yourself. But here's the issue, is that sometimes you're going to have to lay yourself down. Sometimes what you expect from people may cost you something. Actually, it's going to make you feel pain. It's going to make you feel like, why doesn't this person understand where I'm coming from? And you could be completely in the right about some things in life, but yet there's miscommunication. There's a misunderstanding. There's a lie. There's gossip. And it's like, how do I defeat those things sometimes, especially when my heart has always really been for this person, but then I don't feel like I'm being treated the way that I should. And here's the flip side of it. All of us have been an Esau to somebody else. All of us have actually deceived people like Jacob and have been harsh and have had ungodly expectations of people that we were unwilling to do ourselves. Is this making sense to anybody? Because if you just think, if you want to be in ministry or in the church and that you're not going to have any conflict with people, then I would just say you should not be a Christian anymore. Because the fact is, if you're born again, you're going to have trouble, and that trouble 99% of the time is going to come through people. And they will let you down. They will fail you. They won't appreciate you. They won't recognize you. They won't talk through situations. They will cut you off. And how you deal with those situations before the Lord reveals what you really know about the Lord. Because, right, we always quote the scripture, greater is he who is in me than he that is in the world, right? So if we believe that, we believe that against the principalities and powers, right? Well, what about the people who are our height, who are flesh and blood like us, and they're not treating us respectfully? In fact, they seem more like a demon sometimes. What are we going to do in response to them? Well, Jesus set the standard for us. And he said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Listen, you're going to be offended. You are going to be offended, and how you forgive people determines the maturity of your walk with Christ. It absolutely does. And I'm sorry if you didn't really think that it would turn out this way. But this is why you have to love God first. Because you will not be able to love people as you love yourself unless your affections are placed on the Lord first. You're not going to have the power to resist saying what you want to say when you shouldn't say it at that moment. You're not going to have this grace on your life to know how to deal with difficult people. But see, when you become a disciple maker, you have to love people and you have to be patient with people, because ultimately for Christ to be formed on the inside of them, they're probably going to need, God might need to use you to help them mature to where they need to go. And what do I mean use you? I'm saying they're not always going to appreciate you. They're not always going to value the hard work and things you do behind the scenes, or the good things of how you talk about them when nobody else knows. And so these offenses can make or break us. Number 3, even when we win in arguments, we may still desire for healing in relationships, right? So even if you think you're completely right about something, the fact is, if that relationship is not repaired, okay, you might have a sense of peace because you know the truth about something, but your heart still might break for people if you don't make yourself realize that Jesus endured the same things. I mean, imagine how hard it must have been for Jesus to be in the Garden of Gethsemane praying, and then Judas comes with a crowd of soldiers, and then he gives him a kiss on the cheek. And I think Jesus probably, his heart, like my heart and your heart, sunk with this feeling of deep betrayal. Look at some of you, you've been betrayed by people. And you've been really hurt. And you've allowed that hurt to define your identity and your personality and your freedom. So it's hard for you to feel like that you want to open yourself up to people because you're not sure that you can trust them. And I want to encourage you that through the power of the cross, you can love people. You can be free from those past experiences. In fact, I was online last night and I noticed somebody sent me a message, and I think it was in response to the recent reel that John Valdez put up of me sharing. And so this person simply said, "Sir Eric, please forgive me." And I mean, there's things that I could think of, but there wasn't anything specific of what I needed to forgive them. And so I just kind of wrote back to them and I said, "Hey, I just want you to know that I'm not sure what you're asking for forgiveness for, but you can know that there is forgiveness available." You know, because I don't know what to repent of, or I don't know what he's repenting of if there was something. But I think that people carry these heavy weights and relational burdens for years. And it can really weigh you down, and it can affect the joy of the Lord in your life, which is your strength. So if you don't have any strength in the joy of God or the peace of God, it's really hard in church and ministry to feel like you walk in freedom. And this is the way that the enemy really wants to bind us, because he wants to make us think that we should be ashamed of ourselves, that we should be guilty, that we should be condemned, that we cannot walk in freedom because of, even if we did everything right, the enemy tries to turn those things back on us sometimes and say it was because of this or that. And it's really something so small and insignificant. I am totally willing to take responsibility for anything that the Holy Spirit convicts me of. And I pray for that. I want, like the psalmist, right? God, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. I want that on a regular basis. But here, there are some things that we don't realize that some people think we did on purpose that actually never happened. Did you ever feel like that? That you think, well, everybody in the school's against me because they're not inviting me for something, or I didn't know it was this person's birthday, and why do I get excluded all the time? And it wasn't that you were excluded, you probably just didn't hear the announcement. There's little things sometimes in life that happen and don't happen that can define us for eternity, if we're not careful about filtering what we accept and what we don't accept. The truth of the matter is that if you are wrestling with God on a regular basis, then when these offenses from people come, you're going to know how to deal with them the way that Jesus did, and it will help you to walk in peace and joy and continue to have victory despite what people do or they don't do for you. You have to recognize that what you think people say about you, or even what people say about you, should not define who you are. It should be what Jesus says you are. Number 4, even when we are wrong, we may desire to make things right, but we might not know how to make things right. This is what was happening. And every minute here, we're going to read how Esau and Jacob are coming to meet each other. Jacob doesn't even want to meet Esau because the last thing he heard his brother say decades ago was that he was going to kill him. And that's why he fled. He went to Laban, right? And Laban is where he married Rachel and he married Leah, right? And he was out there and he was far from his past. Look, I want to tell you, there's been a lot of things in my past that I'd like to just cut off and never have to deal with those people again. But one thing that I've done in this life is that when I repented of my sin and stopped judging other people without judging myself first, when I began to take responsibility, over the years, I can walk in humility towards people, not because I'm better or more spiritual than anybody else, but because I dealt with issues in my own heart and God forgave me, and that confidence builds up this peace and rest and joy in my life to where now I understand that humility is the key to walking in the kingdom of heaven. You cannot do it in pride. You cannot exalt yourself. You can't point the finger at people without first pointing the finger at yourself. You have to be responsible. When Casey and I got married, I pointed the finger all the time at her. And then I realized if I would stop doing that and point the finger at myself, then maybe Casey wouldn't do what I think is, rude or saying something to me that bothers me. And that's exactly what happened. It's a step of faith for you to deal with your own heart and trust God to deal with the hearts of other people. You have to trust these situations, Lord. If your parents are difficult to get along with, then guess what? You have to be able to love them and walk in humility so that you are trusting God to bring change and breakthrough in your relationship. And that goes for any relationship that you have. Number 5, no matter how far we run from problems in this life, eventually they will catch up to us. So if you ignore issues that you need to make right before God and right with other people, eventually they will come back to you. I'm telling you, I have seen this so many times. And you know what? I have and this is not a prideful statement, but this is a statement of confidence, is that over the years, because of the humility and the things of putting myself lower and saying, forgive me for the things that I did, especially to the young people who used to be in my youth group, which I didn't directly sin against them, but the sin that I committed affected them. So over the years, I felt a great responsibility that should I ever see any of the young people that were in my youth group, you know what I'm going to do? I am intentionally going to go meet with them and ask for their forgiveness. And over the years that has happened, I want to tell you, most of them said, you don't have to do that. Because they weren't thinking about it. They weren't offended with me. Maybe a couple times some had some small offense, but it really hasn't been something for most people. But you know what it does for me? It helps me to see that through my responsibility and without complaining about my situation or asking God to change it because I was unwilling to change myself, when you're willing to change, God will give you grace and breakthroughs and confidence. And many of those young people to this day still contact me. And this is in the 1990s, God. This probably before almost everybody in this room was born. But none of you knew me at that time. You know me now. But at that time, life it didn't look like what it looks like now. And it's taken years of trusting God, walking through humility, walking in forgiveness, caring about people, personally repenting towards people. All of these things over and over and over again. And now we have a deep root. And a root that produces lots of fruit. And everybody wants to know, how do you produce fruit in this life? And I want to tell you, I'm not good enough to produce fruit without being rooted in Christ. There is a measure of the fear of the Lord that you have when you get born again. And that measure should increase as you walk with God and you realize in the light of the holiness of God that you and I need to change how we think, how we talk, how we act. And it always involves people. And there are some people over the years that have felt like a thorn in my flesh. But you know what? When I stop treating them like that, and I start forgiving and valuing them, some of those relationships have become my closest relationships. Sometimes the people who rub you wrong the most, whether their personality or something they said or did, you know what happens? They turn into being the ones that you appreciate the most. Because God will put certain people in your life. How many of you just like to be around some people more than others? Right? Nobody wants to admit it. But anyway, no, we all do. There's certain people that we just love to be around and could be around them 24/7. And then there's some people that we like and we wave to and we'll sit next to, but we don't really engage as much. And then usually there's a circumstance that takes place in our life where that person becomes more engaged and involved in our life and we didn't invite them. And then you get a little bit frustrated and you work through the hard issues, and then you see the deeper reason of why God brought you together when you deal with the issue. And then you go, wow, I couldn't imagine life without this person. I couldn't imagine my maturity without God putting this thorn in my flesh in this life to help me to grow up and mature. Is this making sense? You're still looking at me like an animal in headlights at nighttime. Number 6, there is no shortcuts to making things right with God and others. You just have to do it. And I don't like to do it any more than you do. I may have told some of you this story one time. I was, when SNR was being, either it was already built. Yeah, it was already built. And I was coming this way. Here's NCCC, and here's SNR. And I had to go to the light and turn right. Well, there was no sign that says you can't turn right on red, which means you should be able to do that. So I turn right on red. A little yellow guy pulls me over. Sir, you made an illegal turn. I said, what? Well, I was going to SM Echoland. And I said, well, sir, I didn't see a sign there. And he kept telling me why it was illegal and everything, and I got really frustrated, and I'm thinking, just give me the dumb ticket. I don't care right now. I started getting an attitude, right? And I'm thinking, this guy, anyway, have a good day, sir, and and then I get to SM, and I walk in the department store, and I'm looking to get what I need to get, and I feel this weight of conviction, just like, you must go back and repent, And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that right now. And, I don't want to humble myself. He was mean, And I felt like the Lord said clearly, I want you to buy him, I think it was like 500 peso gift card, and go back and repent and tell him you appreciate his responsibility, his authority, and all those things. Like, man, buy the gift card. You got gift cards? Yeah, okay, give me the gift card. Drive back, and you have to go the long way because you can't turn, right? And so I gotta go. That's the way things are sometimes, right? You can't just go back and fix it quickly. You gotta take the long route, and usually there's a lot more that's gonna happen in your heart before you get to bringing breakthrough. So I go back there. I wait at the light, and then I turn, and he was still standing. I go, sir, hey, I just want you to know I appreciate your authority, and I was a bit frustrated, but I want to ask for your forgiveness. And doing so, I want to bless you with this card right here. It just says to say, I appreciate you. And he goes, no, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. And I said, no, I do have to do that. And so we went back and forth for a while, and he finally accepted it. And I think that he was very surprised, who's this crazy white guy who's, bothering me today. But there's no shortcuts. Like, I felt that deep conviction. Here I am as a missionary, right? And any time, like I've got pulled over once when we used to live in Lanang years ago, insular area, when we were coming this way, and as you go through that intersection where Azuela is right there, it would change the speed limit, but there was no speed limit sign that says the change at that time. So I didn't know it changed, so technically in my mind, I wasn't over speeding. And yet, when I did that, and I got pulled over, there were like 3 of them there. They had their speed guns out and everything, And, the guy walks up to me. And I've learned now in the Philippines that when somebody in authority comes to correct you or which I didn't even know I was going to be pulled over for, because I thought I wasn't over speeding. He walks over, he's smiling, like Filipinos smile 24/7 a day. And so I smiled and I said, "Hey, sir, how are you?" He says, "I'm good today, sir." And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." I said, "What can I do for you?" He goes, "Well, sir, you were over speeding." And then he explained, and I said, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see the sign. I didn't think there was a sign and everything." But he says, "Well, what are we going to do, sir?" I said, "Well, I don't know. What should we do right now?" I'm like, "Are you going to give me a ticket or what's going on?" Then I realized where this was going. And he says, "Well, we need to have a solution." And I said, "Well, this solution," now I caught on and I go, "Does this solution, how much does that solution cost?" And he said, "Well, that solution is up to you, sir." And I said, "Well, how much does it cost you normally to get lunch over here?" And I pointed at something. He goes, "Oh, about 100 pesos." I don't know what it was, And I said, "Well, so the solution could be reached if there were 200 pesos available for you to go to lunch, right?" He said, that would be a wonderful lunch, sir." And I said, "Well, you know what? You take yourself and your buddies and go get lunch today, and I appreciate you letting me go." And I took off. Hey, maybe he should have given me a ticket, but I think he also understood that I probably didn't realize what the speed. And another time, I'll tell you one more funny one, is that I have driving stories all over Davao. So when I was coming down JP Laurel and you would turn left to go to SPMC, right? Okay, so on the signs, it says, I don't know if it still does because I don't do it anymore, but it says yield, a green light. If there's not an arrow, but it's just a green light, it says yield to oncoming traffic. So in America, that means that you can turn left. It doesn't say only turn on the green arrow. Now, if it says that, that's clear. You can only turn on the green arrow. So traffic was not really much coming, and there was plenty of room. I wasn't, doing anything crazy, and I just turned green. So pull over, and he goes, "Sir, you can't turn there." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, sir, what?" This is like when the light system just got put in Davao. Okay, so this is a long time ago. I said, "Well, sir, can you read for me what it says on that sign?" And he looked at me and he goes, "Just go ahead, sir." Just go ahead, because I think it was an Englishing thing, okay? All right, let's look at Genesis 32, starting in verse 22 through 32. Are you with me? Okay. Genesis 32, starting in verse 22 through 32. "And he arose in the night." Now let me say this. He's on the way to go meet Esau. Okay? Which he doesn't want to meet him. But he knows he can't do it. And he's actually splitting up his family into at least 2, maybe 3 different groups to send them ahead. And in case some of them, something bad happens to them, he can take the other family and run away. That's what he's thinking. I mean, this is his mindset. So look at here, verse 22. "And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of the Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day, till the morning. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. So now Jacob walks with a limp. Before we go on, when you have issues with somebody, it doesn't mean that everybody else has issues with them as well. One of the things you have to be careful of if you become a preacher or a teacher is not to preach to one person in the crowd because of an offense between them and you or them and somebody else, and you just target them. Because it's very easy to do that. And everybody is, and you may not say the person's name, but you're alluding to the situation. See, we really have to hear from God when we're preaching and teaching. And when you hear from God, God is not going to ever shame people into obedience. Are you with me? Let me say that again. God is never going to shame people into obedience. Okay? He took your shame upon himself so that you could love the way that he loved. So his wives and children and servants, God's having them go away from Jacob, and he's going to deal with Jacob's heart. And here he is, a man wrestled. Now, some might say an angel. Okay, some versions might say an angel. Until morning. You know, prayer sometimes is praying through the night. And not just praying the length of a night, but praying through night seasons. Seasons of the dark night of the soul. Seasons where nobody understands how you feel, but it's just you and God. And okay, he wrestled with this being, but yet you and I might not physically wrestle with God, but we wrestle with our flesh before God. And we humble ourselves to God. And then he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. And now Jacob is going to walk like this the rest of his life. You see, this is almost like a born-again experience for Jacob. Because if you don't walk with a limp in this life, then you haven't wrestled with God. Because I promise you, God doesn't want to just defeat you. He wants you to understand who he is so that you would trust in his strength and not your own. You see, one of the things we do as parents when we raise our kids, we lovingly correct our kids. And the challenge with that is staying at peace when we do that. So you can break a child's will if you're not lovingly correcting. And so that was a struggle I had when we first had Sierra, because I didn't know how to lovingly correct my kids. My parents were great parents, but they didn't know how to lovingly correct us. And it was more like yelling and screaming in the home, you know, than it was making things right and walking at peace. And then when my family came to the Lord, everything started to change. How we talk to each other, how we honor each other above ourselves. And I felt a great responsibility to honor my parents and learn how to do that and change the way that I think, talk, act, be responsible around the home and not complain about everything and why I didn't have what some other people had or grew up a certain way that some other people grew up. The point of what I'm saying is that there are times that God is going to separate you to himself. And you're going to have to wrestle with issues, with flesh. And you're going to have to leave it with the Lord. And you know you leave it with the Lord when you walk away with a limp. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." This is what the man is saying to Jacob. But Jacob says, I will not let go of you until you what? You bless me. And and the man says to him, what is your name? He says, Jacob. Now, Jacob means supplanter or deceiver. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Think about this. Jacob struggled with not wanting to meet Esau. What happens? He's fearful. And he needs to deal with this situation correctly, but he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he wrestles with God, and by wrestling with God, God changes his name. And he gives him a name that would not only be for him, but for an entire nation and identity of people. And what does Israel mean? It means God prevails. So did Jacob lose? No. He lost to God, but I would say he surrendered to God. And his surrender to God caused God to prevail and win. And when God wins in your life, guess what? You win as well. For you have struggled with God and men and have prevailed. Then Jacob saying, tell me your name, I pray. And this is what this being says to him. Why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. For verse 30, so Jacob called the place Peniel. Listen what he says here. For I have what? Seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle shank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and a muscle that shrank. Who is he wrestling with? It doesn't tell us it was Jesus, but it sure does sound like Jesus. We call this a Christophany. Now, if it was an angel being revealed, you call that an what? A theophany. This is what I believe. Again, this is not what Scripture says, but I believe this is Jesus revealing himself. Even though he cannot fully help Jacob know who he is, Jacob says, what's your name? I don't think I've ever met anybody like you. I've never wrestled anybody like this. You're making me walk away with a limp. There's something about you that's different. In other places, I think it's in Judges, the parents of Samson. They said, what is your name? He said, why do you want to know my name? Being it is wonderful. I mean, you look at it, I think it's like Judges 13 or 15, somewhere around there. Right here, he's wrestling with God. But here, the only way to win in this life is to wrestle with God and learn how to surrender. That's it. Now let's read this last part and we'll be finished. Genesis 33, verses 1 through 11. Now, this is after he wrestled. He's about to meet Esau. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. All right, Jacob is probably a bit scared right now. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants, and he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. So he's walking to him, he bows. He walks towards him, he bows. Like there's this super humility on him. That humility was not there before he wrestled with God. Now, we might think of that as being a little extreme, okay? If you offend me and I come out of my car and you're like, Sir Eric, I would go, Bobby, stop it. Don't do that. It's weird. But he has this different attitude now. He knows he has overcome because his name has changed now. And he probably doesn't know how to introduce himself to people now. Jacob. Yeah. I have a new name. Can I tell you about it? I've changed. I'm different. I'm not going to react to you the way that I would have in the past, because now I've prevailed with God. Look at this. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself 7 times, came near his brother, verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him. Look at this. Totally unexpected. And embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children and said, who are these with you? Think about this. This was not what Jacob was expecting. But what if Jacob did not wrestle with God? Are you following me? What if Jacob complained and wanted to take up arms to fight and didn't bow himself to Esau? He probably wouldn't have won that fight. But the biggest fight that he had to fight was the fight within himself. And when he surrendered his will to God by wrestling with him, he had authority that comes from humility that brought about a breakthrough that he had been longing for decades. And now God gives him a new name. God gives him a new destiny. God raises him up. And in fact, his brother comes, loves on him, kisses him, hugs him. And they probably don't even need to say the words, I forgive you. I still think it's a good idea to say it. Maybe they did say it and it's not recording. But here's the deal. That embrace meant, I forgive you. I release you. You don't have to wrestle anymore. Look, you wrestle with God, you won't have to wrestle with people so much. I hope you understand that, because that's how we overcome. It's not overcoming by being louder and fighting and being so tense and worried and anxious and stressed out and trying to fix things. No. The moment you try to steady the ark is when you die. Think about this. Jacob is wrestling with God and he doesn't die. Okay, if it was an angel, then whatever. But the fact is, he had some real aggravation in his life and in his heart that he was unwilling to get rid of, and it took a whole night of wrestling with God for his heart to be surrendered to the Lord. Now he's seeing the fruit of his reward. So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. He's calling Esau, I'm your servant, Esau. Different attitude. Then the maidservants came near, they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came with her children. They bowed down. He's training his family, right? In humility. Guys, ladies, what you allow in your heart is how you're going to raise your kids. You cannot grow up and be a maturing husband, wife, father, or mother and be effective in raising children if you're still holding on to issues from the past with other people. You have to release those things. You have to walk in freedom, because you know why? If you don't, your kids are going to repeat what you did. Because that's part of a curse that's being passed down. Can I encourage you? Break the curse. Wrestle with God. Break that curse. Your identity is not what you used to be. You're a new creation in Christ. But some of these issues that you're struggling and wrestling with and you don't know what's next, this is why you walk by faith and you entrust all things to God, because I promise you, He is faithful and He will not leave you or forsake you. Afterwards, Joseph, look at this, Joseph and Rachel came near and they bowed down. Think about this. Joseph becomes one of the second most powerful man in Egypt. And he was a Jew. That wasn't supposed to happen. Listen to me. Joseph learned humility through his father Jacob, which gave him an ability to not be defeated when he was lied about by other people. When women say, he raped me, and that didn't happen. When he was thrown in prison for doing the wrong thing. When he didn't do anything wrong, I'm sorry. I'm sitting here trying to explain to you that there is a generational blessing that could be upon your family in an instant if you would take responsibility. You. Don't blame your parents. Don't blame your situation. Don't blame somebody else for the way that you feel. When you take responsibility, I am telling you, you will wrestle with God and you will entrust these things to God. And God will be in control, and God will fight for you, and God will give you divine appointments and supernatural things that will build your life. And you will look back at your life and all of these testimonies of what God has done for you, and you won't be able to ignore it. And for the rest of your life, your peace will increase, your victory will increase, your joy will increase, and you will see the hand of God on everything you say, do, and think. Then the maidservants came near and their children, they bowed down. Everybody bowed down. Verse 8, Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company which I met?" And he said, "These are to find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Jacob is bringing all kinds of gifts to Esau. It's amazing what people do when they make things right with God and how they want to make things right with others. Reconciliation. It is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. Esau said, and he said to him, "These are to find favor in the sight of my Lord." He's calling Esau his Lord in a respectful way, not a weird way. But Esau said, "I have enough. My brother, keep what you have for yourself. I don't need it." Jacob said, "No, please. If I have now found favor in your sight." In other words, if you don't realize how many decades I've been wondering what this meeting would look like. And now I have this opportunity and I don't want to miss it. And it's not to pay for anything. I forgive you, you forgive me, we're done. But what I want to tell you is not only do I want your forgiveness, but I want to bless you. Look at this. "If I have found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, as much as I have seen your face, as though I have seen the face of God." Think about that. Didn't he just see the face of God? Didn't he just wrestle with God? Didn't he just have this encounter with either Jesus or this angelic figure that represents God that is unlike anybody he's ever met? And he was shocked at the power and the authority that this person carried. And you were pleased with me. Please take my blessing. What happened at the beginning of their relationship? Jacob took Esau's blessing. Now, what is Jacob doing? Please take my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me. And because I have enough, so he urged him and he took it. Listen, I'm going to close with this. Often, we will be surprised by the willingness of others if we would take a step of faith. I'm not saying if you've gone to somebody before that you always have to keep going back to them to try to make things right. Sometimes you do what you can do and you trust it to God because it may not be going anywhere at the moment. And it may take days, weeks, months, and years, decades for some people to be willing to open their heart. But you wrestle with God. You humble yourself before God. You trust God's will and plan for your life. Whenever reconciliation takes place, God is honored more than we realize. Why? Because reconciliation is not only a biblical value, it is the entire reason why Jesus came to earth. That's it. To be reconciled to God, to be reconciled with your brother and sister is the reason why Jesus came. It's not just for you to work miracles or do healing or have a big ministry and be successful in this life. That's not it. It's to be reconciled to God and to man. After we're reconciled to God, we can love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Listen to this verse in Colossians 4:12. Epaphras, who is one of you and a servant of Jesus Christ, sends greetings. He is always wrestling in prayer for you, that you may stand firm in all the will of God, mature and fully assured. Friend, I want to encourage you to not just make things right with God and each other for yourself, but make things right so that God can bless you, so that you can be walking in reconciliation, and so that you could be a man or a woman of prayer and an example to other people of why reconciliation is so important. The only thing we know about this guy, Epaphras, is that he's a man who wrestled in prayer. Wow. When we think of wrestling in prayer, when we think of wrestling with our flesh, with the holy God, we need to think about, what does my life represent? How does God look at me? Am I surrendered? Am I willing to love people that have hurt me? Am I willing to love people that misunderstand me? Am I willing to love people so that as I love them, even if they don't do anything back for me, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do? That's the goal. Christianity is not easy. But you know what? It works. And there's no other option. So either we submit ourselves to the Lord and say, God, change me so that you might reach others through my life and make me willing to build bridges with people. Don't burn bridges. Don't burn them. Even if people have hurt you, you pray for them. like Epiphras. You wrestle in prayer and you say, God, bring a breakthrough. Bring change. If my heart needs a change, Lord, change me. If their heart needs a change, change them. But God, bring a breakthrough. Bring change. The goal is not always about who's right. The goal is that God's will is accomplished in all circumstances.